Hey guys, so I made this video to go over the notes with you instead of doing it live because some people would miss it if I did it live. So I'm going to record it and then you guys can watch it on my YouTube page. Okay, so today we're doing the first section of chapter 2. This is the first civilization we really kind of get to talk about. So we're going to kind of jump right into it. So we're going to be talking about Sumer today. First, before we get into talking about Sumer, there's some vocab terms that we need to know. And I know that the vocab was assigned and that some of you have already know this and you've already done the vocab. But if you haven't done it yet, there's some of the terms here. So I'm just going to go over a few of them really quick. So Fertile Crescent, this is an area that stretches. It makes an arc shape like this, like a crescent shape, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. So it goes from the Persian Gulf along the Tigris and Euphrates, wraps around the Mediterranean Sea, and then down through what is now modern-day Egypt. We call this the Fertile Crescent. Mesopotamia, this is the area between the Tigris and Euphrates River. If you translate the language Mesopotamia, you translate it, it literally means between two rivers. So Tigris and Euphrates. Sumer, this is a civilization that developed in Mesopotamia around 3300 BC, and it's located in southeastern Mesopotamia. Okay, the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's like the first long form narrative poem. So it's like a kind of like a novel almost. Like it tells a story. And it describes a great ancient flood. Epic of Gilgamesh was really one of the only, long form stories that was ever made at that time. So it was kind of really important. Hierarchy, it's a system of ranking social groups. There's hierarchies in every society. Think here in the United States, you have the rich, middle class, working class, and then poverty, right? Poverty level, different social classes. You've heard that before. It's a system called hierarchy. A ziggurat, it's a pyramid-shaped temple that's often the biggest building in a city. I'm going to show you some of those in a second. And then cuneiform. Cuneiform is a Sumerian writing. It was written by making wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets. I'm going to show you that too in this slideshow. Okay, so now we're diving right into it. So the Fertile Crescent. Civilizations on the Fertile Crescent arose more than 5,000 years ago. Sumerian civilization was located in between the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley. So the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and then in between them, there was a valley like this, and that is where the civilization developed. The soil was fertile. It was suitable for agriculture, which means that it attracted farmers. The soil was good for farming. It had good soil content. It was wet, but it wasn't like runny. It was just like the perfect amount to be really good for farming. So it attracted people to that area because they wanted to farm. So over time, the population begins to boom or soar, and that's because people from surrounding areas were making their way into the Fertile Crescent to farm in those desirable locations. So the area between the Tigris and Euphrates becomes known as Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. Okay, and this is just what I was talking about. So here's the Persian Gulf. This is where the river starts. They call this the Persian Gulf, and then it turns into the Tigris and the Euphrates, and these rivers go up like this. And in between these rivers is what we call Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. But the Fertile Crescent itself is this entire green area. So it makes its way from the Persian Gulf along the Tigris and Euphrates, and then across to the Mediterranean Sea, and then through this area that they call it the Sinai Peninsula right here over the northern part of it along the Mediterranean. And then it goes down to this area, which this is the Nile River. So another important river that we'll talk about in the future. But this is what we call the Fertile Crescent right here. And you'll hear us refer to that a lot throughout World Civ. Okay, so it was a great area for farming, but they did have some environmental problems. So the first one is it's located in the middle of a valley. So just think, you have two rivers and then a valley like this. What happens if you get a lot of rain? Those rivers will flood, and then where's all that water going to go? In the valley, and it's going to cause big flooding. And that's what the Epic of Gilgamesh was about, was that big flood that describes a great flood. So it was a story, it was a poem about something that really happened. So there's mountains as well in the northern part of this area, and the melting snow in the spring would cause massive flooding. It would wash away all that good topsoil for farming, so it would ruin the farming land and the soil content. And their houses that they made at that time, like they weren't living in like these big, brick and mortar houses with concrete foundations and all that, or made of wood. Their houses were built from mud or from brick made from mud. So they would like take mud and form it in a brick and then lay it out in the sun and let it dry until it was harder. But once it got wet, it would break apart, right? So that's the first problem they would have, is they had big problems with flooding. The next problem was that they were prone to suffer from droughts in the summertime. So because of where they're at, where the geographic location of the Fertile Crescent was, is that there are a lot of surrounding areas that are, dry and arid. And so if winds were blowing through those dry and arid areas, it would bring hot, dry wind into Mesopotamia or into the Fertile Crescent. So then what this would do is it would turn that fertile soil into dust. It would dry it out, and we kind of know a little bit about this now because our soil is really dry outside right now. Like, we haven't had rain in a while. And so our soil is kind of dusty too right now. So the soil turns into dust. And this would destroy crops. It would cause them to shrivel. It could also cause famine, which is where you plant a bunch of crops, but then they don't grow. And so then you can't eat it because it didn't grow. Okay. A community, in order to survive, early farming communities had to work together to build complex irrigation systems, so dams and canals. The creation of these public works projects often led to the formation of a government. And we know this from earlier in the other section of notes from the first chapter, is that a lot of government and civilization is developed around this idea of alone, that task could not be done, but together the task could be accomplished. But it requires lots of organization, and that's what governments provide, is organization. So officials provided leadership and a very large workforce, and this led to large projects to control flooding, to take care of the two environmental problems that this area would experience. So this leads to the rise of what we call Sumerian city-states. And it's kind of like they were cities. They were small, like a city, but they were like a state. Like in each city had its own government and its own rules. They were similar, but they were different. And so that's why they're called city-states. So Sumerians built several cities by 3000 BC, and the city-state was the basic political unit in Sumer. So the city-state consisted of a city and the land surrounding it. Ur and Uruk were some of the world's first great cities. And before, like when we were talking about Shatt al-Huyuk, that city had like 1,000 or 2,000 people. Ur and Uruk had tens of thousands of people, like 10 to 20,000 people. So they were like 10 times bigger than Shatt al-Huyuk was. They would use mud and brick to build the cities, and a lot of these city-states became extremely wealthy due to trade. They would sail along the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. They would travel through the Mediterranean. They would also actually cross through the desert and trade with other city-states that existed outside of the Fertile Crescent. And this is the city of Ur. So this is what it looks like. So you can see like the rivers are here, and they would build these canals around so people couldn't attack the city because of the canal. They'd have to go over that. They also had bridges built to help you go into the city. They had these big walls. This is where most of the people would live. They'd also live in here. And then this is the ziggurat, which is the biggest building there. It's the biggest temple. And then these are the palaces, and you can see they're walled off from the rest of it. So this is what the city of Ur looked like. Obviously, it's not a photo, it's a recreation, so it could have been a little bit different, but that's pretty much what it looked like. Okay, so the first cities of Sumer, the population is numbered in the tens of thousands instead of just 1,000 like in Shatt al-Huyuk. Roads and avenues were used for parades and processions. So, I mean, they had roads, they had avenues, they had public works projects. Like, it was a city. The ziggurats were the largest buildings in the city. They would have shrines to gods or goddesses atop each ziggurat. More about this later. The rulers lived in the palaces while most people lived in tiny homes packed in alleyways or in the outer walls of the city. And then they had bazaars, and bazaars were like ancient shopping malls. Think like a flea market almost, where you could go and people sell what they have. Some people sell the produce that they've grown. Some people sell stuff that they've pulled out of trash cans. Some people, like people sell what they have. That's what the bazaar was. So you could go there, you could buy your food, you could buy clothing, you could buy trinkets, you could buy items, tools, stuff like that. So bazaar was kind of like an ancient shopping mall. This is a ziggurat. This is what it would look like. So you can see it's these big steps, and they would lead you up to the top. You could go up the steps, or they had these ramps. But these ramps are really steep, so they actually had little steps in there, like baby steps, like this big. Um, and they were just so like from far away, it looks like it's flat, but really there's steps there. Okay, trading life. So trade brought riches to Sumerian life. They would trade a lot because it's not possible to grow and create everything. You're going to need something from somewhere else. So you would trade what you have extra of, surplus of, to another place for what they have surplus of. And then by doing that, you're able to have both, right? They used wheeled carts. Sumerians may have had the first wheeled vehicles, like carts with wheels on them. They didn't invent the wheel, though, but they're the first to really use the wheel like it's used today for a cart, so it makes it easier to transport things. And like anything, competition arises. So between rival Sumerian city-states, competition emerges. People battled for control of the land to control it, and they fought over the water. So now people were looking more at strong leaders that could protect them. So they were looking at war leaders, people who were willing to spill blood and start battles and, you know, take control versus just like telling people what to do. They would like physically take control of something. So these war leaders now become the hereditary rulers. So now the way it worked out is that these war leaders became so powerful that they would be like the leader. And then when they would die, their son would take over. And then when that son grew older, he would have kids, and then he would die, his kids would take over. And it became like a hereditary system. And this set the stage for the first form of Sumerian government, which was a monarchy. So the Sumer monarchy. Monarchy is a form of government in which a king or a queen has total authority. They control every aspect of life. The ruler is responsible for maintaining the city walls, and the irrigation systems. Scribes were employed by the ruler to collect taxes and keep records. So these were people who were writing. They would go around and collect taxes. Yes, taxes have been going on for thousands of years, and I don't see them stopping anytime in the foreseeable future. So scribes were employed to collect the taxes and to write down and keep records of who owned what land and who paid what. Rulers also had religious duties. They were seen as the chief servant to the gods. They held ceremonies to please the gods, so sacrifices and feasts and stuff like that. Okay, social classes. So society was structured into a social hierarchy. The highest class would be the ruling family and the leading officials or priests. The middle class or the second class, the middle class would be scribes, merchants, artisans. Artisans make stuff, merchants sell stuff, and scribes write stuff. They were viewed as the middle class. And then the third class, which was the majority of society, was the peasant farmers. These were your working class. These were people that were working the basic jobs that hold the society together. So some peasant farmers had their own land, but that was very rare. Most of the time they would work for land belonging to the king or to the temples or churches. And then they had a fourth class, and this was like the out of class. Like they weren't viewed as upper, middle, lower. They were like not viewed as being a part of the class, and that was slaves. And slaves, there was two different types of slaves. There were slaves that were captured in war, so they were kind of like prisoners of war. They would be caught in battle. They would bring them back to the Fertile Crescent, and they would make them slaves to perform labor, hard labor. The other type of slave would be someone who would be a peasant farmer, and they could not pay their debts. They couldn't pay their taxes. They couldn't pay their bills. If they couldn't do that, they could sell themselves into slavery and then use the money they got from selling themselves to slavery to pay those debts so their family didn't have to be plagued by their debts. So this would usually be like a man would sell himself into slavery so that way his wife and kids didn't have to worry about the debts that they occurred. So, I mean, that's the other type of slave that you would have in the Fertile Crescent. Okay, so this just shows you the hierarchy. And each city-state had a very distinct or specific hierarchy. City-states had different classes, different names for them, but they were all pretty much the same idea. And so the royalty was on the top, your middle class was here in the middle, your peasant farmers and working class were on the bottom, and then you had slaves who were the very, very bottom. And again, this is representative of how many people would be in each class too. So there was less people at the top. There was a little bit more people in this middle class. There was even more working class farmers, and there was even more slaves. Okay, women in Sumer. So women Women in Sumer held a higher social standing than in later civilizations of Mesopotamia. So in Sumer, women were viewed more favorably. There were women deities or goddesses. They were highly honored in religious practices. However, as you will find out as we talk about all the different civilizations, all the ancient civilizations, women never held the same legal rights that men had. They were never viewed as equal. So some civilizations view women like this much, others view women like this much, but they never viewed women higher than men, and they were never viewed them the same. That's more of a modern idea. I mean, even in the United States, just 100 years ago, women gained the right to vote. So, I mean, the idea of equality between men and women is a relatively newer, modern idea. So, when we're talking about ancient civilizations, you're going to find that more often than not, women were not viewed the same way that men were. Okay, religion. So, Sumerians were polytheistic. Poly means more than one, it means multiple. So, they had multiple gods. They believed that gods were thought to control every aspect of life. They believed the gods used truth and justice. They also believed that they were responsible for causing violence and suffering. So they believed that the gods were responsible for the good. They were also responsible for the bad. They believed that the safety of their city-state was ensured by keeping the gods and goddesses happy. So they believed in doing the celebrations, the feasts, and the sacrifices to please the gods. They also believed in an afterlife. Okay, Sumerian writing. So Sumerians invented the earliest form of writing around 3200 BC. It's known as cuneiform, and it comes from the Latin word for wedge. The reason they call it, or the reason they gave it the name cuneiform, or in Latin they refer to it as wedge, is because it used a series of wedges and lines. So it was formed by making wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets, like this, like that. This is what the translation of it roughly is today to our alphabet, but they didn't have like an alphabet. It was just, that's what those wedge shapes would mean, like if you try to roughly translate it. Okay, the legacy of Sumer. So Sumerian city-states were taken over by invaders around 2500 BC. The invading people learned from and built off of Sumerian ideas. So they kept the polytheism, they kept the leadership style, they kept the hierarchy, they kept a lot of their agriculture and architectural. So like they kind of just took it over and it was under new leadership. This helped spread the Sumerian legacy across the Middle East, and we'll see that when we talk about the Middle East. You'll see how much of an impact Sumer had on the rest of how the Middle East develops. Okay, and that is it for the notes. Now I just want to show you really quickly. Your homework for today, your assignment for today is to fill in these notes. So you're going to fill in these blanks, and these blanks can all be filled in from the notes that I just went over in this video. So if you want, you can open the video up, listen to it, and answer these as you go and just pause the video when I say it, or you can just look at it and do it visually, read it, and then type it in here. You're going to fill this in verbatim, word for word from the notes, and then you're going to turn this in. That's your assignment for today, okay? So hopefully the video helps. Hopefully you guys find it helpful, and I will see you guys soon. All right, bye.